You're listening to the Cambridge Insider Podcast. On today's episode, hosts Mariah and Stephen discuss boarding schools and international student programs. Today's episode is sponsored by Perkament School. Perkament School is an independent, co-educational college preparatory boarding and day school located in Pennsburg, Pennsylvania. Thanks for listening.
Cambridge Insider Podcast time. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Cambridge Insider Podcast. As always, my co-host, Mariah Thompson. How are you?
I'm doing good. Spring is here, so one step closer to summer, so we love that. But
spring is officially in the air, for sure. And spring is in the air at the Cambridge Network as well. We see a lot of our students sort of either on spring break currently, and once they come back from spring break, it really is starting to wind down the school year, looking at graduation ceremonies, and before we know it, we'll be into the summer and a new fall season that precedes that. So things are looking up here in the international education world in the US. Yes. Mariah, I believe today we're going to be talking boarding houses and boarding schools in particular.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes on this podcast, we talk a lot about our homestay program and our homestay schools because we do a lot of that. But we do also work with boarding schools and have partnerships with boarding schools. So we do have information, what that looks like, what our services look like, and also tips for boarding schools. Mm-hmm. So if you're a current boarding school or you're a boarding school that is looking for a partner, I'm just going to ask you some questions, Stephen, what that looks like, some practical takeaways for boarding schools, things of that nature. So it's just like a little bit of a different facing audience that we might have to speak on that for them.
For sure. And just on that point, just before you start asking a couple questions, we certainly have, as the data continues to emerge for the fall season, we've certainly seen an uptick in the number of boarding applications that are coming through to our partner schools. So there is interest there, from across, in particular, China, Vietnam, and Korea for boarding programs. I think it's a very good topic for us to deal with at this stage.
Yeah. So as we were talking about this, like pre-show, there are a couple topics that we have that we want to talk about. They do all kind of, it's so interesting. It's like everything we do. They're very different, but they're also very similar too at the same time. But I'll just kick off into the first question. For boarding schools, how can they diversify their price point and selling points amongst different students? Can you speak more upon that, or even better ask the question too as well?
Sure. I think it's when you asked this question, we were on a Cambridge a visit to some of our West Coast partners last week, and a lot of those were boarding partners, and a big topic of conversation throughout the week as we were meeting with these partners was diversification. But I think typically when schools think about diversification in the international program, they think about students from different regions. And that certainly is one part of the diversification. There are a couple of other parts of the diversification which I want to point to. Firstly, though, when we talk about diversification of the student population, many schools are looking to diversify, right? There is, and I think there's no use in us denying it. There are certainly some geopolitical factors at play, in particular currently, which I think is pushing schools to look outside of that mainstream number of students that are coming just from China and look at how can we get into other regions. If we haven't tapped into the Vietnam and Korea region, how can we do that? And there's a couple of things that go with that. Number one, understanding what the Korean, what the Vietnamese, and any other market that you want, what their specific selling points are. What we've seen in our experience with school partners and the partners that we've worked with, in particular from China, things like location, academic profile are super, super important. And those are really important selling points. And although those are selling points for the Vietnamese and the Korean markets, we see for those two markets in particular, the first selling point or the first hurdle that they need to overcome is really that price point. So for schools to think about how can I drop that price point to gain a little bit of that diversity. And we often urge schools, in order in particular to get a foot in the door, to not look at your first couple of Vietnamese and Korean student enrollments as a financial asset that you've gained, but rather in terms of the diversity that it's going to give you. Use some of that really good couple of years of students, coming in and recruiting from the China region to sort of be able to invest a little bit and drop those price points for Vietnam and Korea. And then once you have your foot in the door, once you can start branding yourself, once you can sort of churn out a couple of success stories and students go to your programs, Vietnamese and Korean students go to your programs and are successful. Once you have your foot in the door, then you can look at how you want to sort of situate yourself financially within those markets. But I think first and foremost for schools to recognize that the Vietnamese and the Korean markets are very price sensitive. And that is something that you're going to have to overcome. It often takes a conversation with a board of directors and a conversation with the CFO to see how you can sort of balance that out. That's the first and most important thing. I think the second thing about diversification as a whole, which I think is important, or the third thing, if you think about diversifying the student population, you think about diversifying sort of your selling points. What are you selling? The third thing is also thinking about diversification in terms of how do we attract students. So typically schools for many, many years and still today as well have attracted students in a very traditional sales, person-to-person, in-person networking, events, agency-driven model, right? And I know that a lot of words that I threw out there, but typically, either you as a school directly or through a partner agency like Cambridge, you brand and you market your schools through sales teams and through agency connections and networks in these different regions that you recruit from. It's a face-to-face model, right? I say to Mariah, I have a great school. Are you interested in coming to this boarding school? I can hand you a couple of pamphlets. We can do a presentation. We can even interview you if you were a student and interested in coming, right? So that's the traditional model. That model is still there, and we've spoken a lot about how the market has changed. That model is still there, but it is significantly reduced in the number of students. We're not going to go into the reasons why. We've done that in previous podcasts, but to understand that there are limitations to that model. So thinking about how do I diversify how I attract students, you've got to start thinking digital. You've got to start thinking, how do I reach a global audience without having to be at 100 places at once? How do I reach a global audience with the snap of a finger? And we all know that these digital platforms on our phones, social media, digital marketing, digital branding is the way to do that, right? So much so, and we've spoken and we've mentioned this in the past, that we at Cambridge made a decision probably about 2.5 years ago that we no longer take school partners on recruitment trips if they haven't been digitally branded before. And that's simply just a cost-efficient return on investment way of doing things. If schools are branded, if people know who they are, it's way easier to take them and see the return on investment for those trips. So thinking just about how do I diversify how I attract students. Don't let go of that traditional way, but certainly think about how can I enter that digital side of marketing, branding, recruitment, and admissions.
Yeah, that's good. And it really breaks it down that diversity when it comes to that word means a lot when it comes to the international students and how you do different things. Now, for the first point, you kind of touched upon this, but you just talked about the geographical. But now, how do you handle the geopolitical climate when it comes to boarding schools and international student programs?
Sure. That's a great point. So, yeah, I touched on it just very briefly. I think a couple of things when we have a lot of school partners that are reaching out to us about this. I'm going to quickly go back to diversity just for a second, because when you think about geopolitical tensions, which have been, let's be honest, as long as this market, the international education market, has been in existence in the United States, there have been geopolitical tensions. Right. This is nothing new. So I'm going to start there. But I think diversification of how you attract students is important. Students, families, agents want to know what is happening. They want real-time news. They want to know how schools are dealing with certain situations. They want to know a school's perspective on certain situations. Schools cannot provide them that if they are not on some digital format of communication, be that a social media platform, be that a live event that is cross-streamed across social media platforms. Because when agents and families pick this up and they can see a video from a head of school reassuring them, telling them what's happening on campus, explaining to them what the culture is within their little micro community at school and in their larger community or town or state, that's what agents want. They want that information. So again, diversifying how you attract students is going to give you as a school a platform to reassure and to sell your brand. And that is so, so crucial. If you're thinking about going on vacation somewhere and you had one little news snippet and the news snippet said, you shouldn't go on vacation because it's really dangerous in this area, what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to go onto your computer or onto your mobile device, and you're going to search and go, is it really dangerous? What should I be looking out for? Is this still a place I want to go to? How can I mitigate certain stresses or obstacles? And that's what agents and families are looking for, just like any other consumer. So that's really, really important to think about. The second thing is in terms of your forecasting. When schools are and specifically we see this with boarding programs that are doing well, but even those that maybe are new to the market and maybe don't have a substantial number of students, international students in that boarding program, is to think about how many students, what is the ultimate goal that I want in terms of student numbers and in terms of student nationalities. So if one specific area, in this case, China, is maybe seeing a little bit more heat than it usually does. And again, I want to just calm everybody down. We've seen a lot of geopolitical tensions in the history of this industry. But if one specific area is getting a lot of heat, thinking about looking at other areas as well to sort of shore up what you have, not to jump ship and say, I can no longer get students from China. No, but as with any investment, is to sort of spread your don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Spread those eggs around, diversify the student population, look at other areas, start recruiting from those areas. So that's really important. Also, just in terms of your usual goal was, we recruit 15 international students every single year. Typically schools for the most part have had that as a sort of standard number, and they've had an application number that results in those, that number of enrollments. I would say to schools, you need to start forecasting or predicting at about 150%, because you don't know the obstacles, you don't know what's going to happen geopolitically. So I would much rather have schools forecast or predict or aim for 150% of their target and be able to slow down their enrollment at a stage once they've reached that number, rather than have that regular aim of 15 students and get to the end of the year and go, we haven't managed to get 15 students because there've been visa holdups or there've been CVIS regulations that we've had to deal with, or certain students maybe haven't accepted our enrollment because of certain issues that they're concerned about. So just sort of over planning a little bit to make sure that you reach those goals, I think is a really important strategy for schools at this point.
Yeah, that's really good. And it gives a little bit of framework of how to course through diversifying and where they're going. Now that we've laid out kind of like the course of that, what does it look like? What is the content? And so one of our questions we have is, what does a good boarding school look like when you're trying to attract students? What type of information, what things should schools be looking at themselves, being like, I have this, this, and this, and I need to tell these students, this is what I have. What does that look like?
Yeah, so 3 things that I'm going to mention that I think are crucial for your boarding program. And then I'm going to mention something that you need to sort of bring all 3 of those together. But let me first mention the first 3. Point number 1, that our audience in particular in Southeast and Eastern Asia, Southern Asia, China, Vietnam, Korea are very, impacted by and they want that information. Number 1 is safety. So thinking about what makes my campus safe. Maybe things that in an American culture or Western culture we don't see as important, or we don't necessarily even deal with as part of how we sell our dorm program. Do we talk about card entry? Do we talk about face recognition? Do we talk about 24-hour security cameras, locking of doors, locking from both ways? When are the dorms sort of locked for the evening? When is bedtime? We don't necessarily always talk about those things in the American culture because they're less important. Right. But again, I'm going to take you back to somebody who's thousands of miles away. A lot of time, the only news they get is a snippet of bad news about the US. Right. The concern is safety. For a mom, for a dad, anybody that has kids would go, I'm concerned about safety. Doesn't matter where you're going in the world. So safety, point number 1. And thinking about how can I illustrate safety to a student or a family, right? Number 2 is proximity of the dorm. A lot of dorm programs, are very close to the campus, which is great. Some of them are on the campus, which is great. Some of them are a little bit away, right? School students either have to take a bus or it's a 5 or 10 minute walk. but explaining to students exactly the proximity of the actual dorm facilities to the school campus is really, really important. Usually we find the closer the better, but if it isn't close, how do we mitigate that? How do we get around that? Is there a bus service? How does the bus service work? Is there a car that drops them off? Does the head of the dorm drive them there? Do they walk 5 minutes? If it's snowing, how does that walk look? So these, again, small things that might not be that important. I typically think of an American dorm student as going, I hope I could walk sort of 10, 15 minutes and relax a little bit before class. Not the case for a lot of students that we're getting from China, Vietnam, and Korea. So proximity, really important, thinking about addressing that. Thirdly, and the final one is student support. So within the dorm structure, who is the main support? What is the access to that support? Is it a dorm parent? Is that 24-hour access? Where's the closest sort of medical, in a medical emergency, how would that look like? Do they have a nurse on campus? If not, where's the closest emergency room? How would that work? From an academic and sort of a more mentoring, social, psychological well-being side, what does the support look like there? So again, a couple important things there that I think need to be highlighted that are really important to the markets. I said I'm going to mention one final thing that sort of brings them together, and this is really crucial. We work with a lot of schools, and there are surprisingly bad or few assets, photos, and videos that show all these things. Mm-hmm. When I meet a school for the first time, they'll show me great photos of the inside of their labs and how campus looks. But if it's a boarding program, oftentimes the idea that it's boarding is one of the main attractions. So let's focus our assets that we are selling your program on with great photos, great videos, great walkthroughs, campus walkthroughs or dorm walkthroughs of the facilities. Because the majority of complaints we get from a school perspective, from a parent perspective is, oh, the dorm is in bad condition, or this doesn't work, or the walk is too long, or the dorm this and that. Let's hype that up a little bit more. Let's get great photos to show them the dorm, to show them the safety, to show them the proximity, to show them how the student support works. Let's get a couple walkthrough videos done by students or by, a professional photographer or videographer that can show students the idea and the experience of living in that dorm. So I hope that gives a little bit of a better idea of sort of the selling points. They may not have been the selling points that you thought of initially. And the final thing I will say is often remember that if you're a boarding program, the boarding is one of the most important selling points. It's up there with your academic program, and it's up there with your college matriculation, the fact that you're boarding. So let's sell it as such.
Yeah, and if you're listening to all these points that he's making about the student support side of what your dorm should look like and what you should put in a video, we just started to offer schools with international programs a free assessment. And so if you want to get connected with us, just go to our website, and there's under the school tab, there's an assessment form, and we can take a look at your program and assess it and help you with some strategy. And it's just for free. So we'll help you with some strategy and what would be the best route for you to support your students and to support your recruitment strategy as well. So definitely take a look at that if your curiosity just got sparked by all the things that Stephen listed off.
Absolutely. And as always, Cambridge here, that assessment is a great way to get in touch, but just get in touch if you have questions, either independently and you want to reach out to us, or just in terms of what we're dealing with here on the pod, remember to reach out to us and we'd be happy to deal with those.
Sweet.
As always, remember to like, listen, subscribe. We appreciate you all jumping along and listening. Mariah, any final points from your side?
No, I think we covered it all.
Happy spring to all of our listeners, and we'll catch you around the next episode of the Cambridge Insider Podcast. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Cambridge Insider Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel to never miss an episode. For more Cambridge updates, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Have a great week and stay connected.